Materialism can make itself felt in many different ways. Here's another game of my student, Lee Gardner. It's an endgame position. Lee had the white pieces. His opponent was a master named Rubin Miller. Take a look at this position. White's up a pawn, but it's a doubled A-pawn. It's white to move. Before I say anything else, I want you to think about it. What would you do? Another way that result-oriented thought can mess with our heads is in the endgame. I've seen a lot of players reach endgame positions and approach them as if it's the inevitable conclusion to a long struggle. Like, here I am at the end of the game, and now I can just win it, or now I can just draw it, or now I'm losing, because I was losing before. But working with great endgame players, what you learn very quickly is that the endgame is a struggle of its own, a very tense, hard, difficult battle. If you have a better game against a Grandmaster, and you go into the endgame, you have to win a whole new chess game. Now, often that's the right place to convert your advantage, but you will not convert it by making bad moves. Just how in my game against Vulasevich, I had a winning game, but that didn't mean that I could win by playing bad moves, and I let him back in the game again and again and again, because strong players will be at their very, very most resourceful when their life's on the line. And similarly, in the endgame, to win it, you have to keep on struggling. And so there are two ways to approach this type of position. One way is to think with white, okay, I'm up a pawn, now I have to win, which Lee told me afterwards is how he approached this position. He was looking for how to win. He couldn't find it, so he just made a move. But the other way to approach the position is to play chess. Here it's not the extra A-pawn that gives white the advantage. It's his passed C-pawn and potential activity. What did you find as white's best move? Well, the first question that comes to mind is, should I trade or should I not trade? And if you decided that you shouldn't trade, you're correct. If white plays rook takes f8, then after bishop takes f8, the king is close enough to the c-pawn to defend without any problem. The pawn locked on e5 will be weak. If the pawn on c5 stays there, it could be very weak. White has weaknesses, black doesn't. Black is fine, and his position can turn better very quickly. For example, if he were to play king d7 to c6, win that c-pawn, now white has a problem. It's as if he's down a pawn because of the double a-pawns, and the e5 pawn can become a weakness that has to be dealt with very soon. Things can turn ugly very, very quickly. So no, white should not trade off rooks. So what should white do? Many of you, I'm sure, know the idea of rooks belong behind passed pawns, so the move rook c1 might become attractive to you. The problem with it here is that black can easily blockade that passed pawn. So, for example, after rook f4, if c6, king d8, the next couple moves, black will take on g4 with check. He can always play rook c4 to cut off the white rook's defense of the c-pawn, and he can always blockade on c8 or c7. And the e5 pawn will be very weak once the white bishop moves. So that's not quite the right idea in this position. So what Lee described to me is that when he was thinking about this position, he tried to figure out, how do I win? He calculated rook takes f8, bishop takes f8, c6 for a while, and he saw that it didn't quite work. After he made that calculation, he saw that he couldn't win. But because he had been looking for a win, as opposed to simply looking for a way to play chess, he was clouded by the fact that there was no win, and he didn't just look for a chess move, and he played rook f3. Now this is logical from one perspective, because now the point is that if it's black to move and black takes on f3, then white can improve his position with king takes f3. But truth be told, this small tempo isn't so important, and the black king is very close to the c5 pawn, so this wasn't the right decision. If Lee had simply been saying to himself, how can I activate my pieces? How can I press my advantage? How can I make the position more complicated for my opponent to defend? He would have very easily found the move rook b1, moving to the open file, planning rook b8 check and rook b7, supporting his c-pawn's advance, inevitably entering into black's queenside. And here white has a great game. After rook b1, if rook f4, rook b8 check, king f7, rook b7 check, king g8, bishop b2, white sacrifices material for tremendous activity. Black would play rook takes g4 check, king f3, and now yes, temporarily it's even material, but white has all the activity. If he plays rook c4, then after rook takes a7, rook takes c5, a5, black's going to have a very, very hard time stopping that a-pawn, because white can support it from the d4 square with the bishop. White's winning. And after rook takes a4, c6, rook c4, c7, white threatens rook b8 check and c8. So black plays king h7, bishop a3, and white wins the game. The next move is going to be bishop d6, defending the pawn, followed by rook b8 and c8. There's nothing for black to do. I should also mention that if instead of king h7, black had played bishop f8, here none of black's pieces can move, and if the rook takes a7, white can win without any problem. If the bishop moves anywhere, then rook a8 check, followed by c8, wins the rook. The black king can never move because of king g7, c8 discover check, making a queen. And the next move for white can be a4, a5, a6. Then he can move his rook to b7, play a7, a8. There's absolutely nothing for black to do, and white wins the game easily. So returning to the original position, Lee looked at rook takes f8, and calculated and saw that he had no way to win that game. In fact, that position would be drawn. If he had been playing just to make a chess move, make the best move, activate his pieces, make the game complicated, push black to the limit, engage in the struggle, he would have found rook b1 very easily, taken over the initiative, and I'm sure he would have won the game. So because Lee was looking for a way to win, and not just to continue with the struggle, he was thrown off when he found that there was no way to win. He played rook f3. His opponent happily traded rooks, rook takes f3, king takes f3, and king d7. And now Lee's psychological state was thrown off. From this position on, this game is very relevant for the next theme as well, the downward spiral. Lee was colored by the emotion of the fact that the game had turned from being good for him to being bad for him. And in many ways, he was clinging to the past evaluation while he was analyzing this position. He was trying to figure out what to do. Lee played king f4, with the idea of king g5 takes g6. His opponent played bishop h6 check. And now Lee's position has reached the critical point. White to move. What would you do? If you have a critical eye in this position, you see that white's pawn is locked on e5. His extra pawn is on a4. The c5 pawn is about to be lost. If the trades were to get made, say the king side were to get locked up like this, say, and black were to be able to take on c5 with his bishop, this position is winning for black because he can gradually attack the queenside pawns, improve in the center, push the d-pawn, play king d5, take on e5. White can't defend because he has no counterattack. So white can't allow that to happen. So given that reality and knowing that it's very important to have passed pawns in the endgame, what would you do with white? This was Lee's chance. With tempo, he should have played g5, attacking the bishop. The bishop goes back, and now c6 check. A discovery. Simplify the game. Hold the position. After king takes c6, bishop takes a7, white's game is fine. He has the two passed a pawns. It doesn't matter that he's up a pawn, but he's not down in material, and black has something to worry about. White can hold this position. And again, I promise you, if I were to give this to my student to solve, I were to say, white to move, what would you do? He would very easily evaluate the position and find the best move. But he was still colored by what happened before, and he was thrown off by the fact that he had judged the position with finality. He closed his mind to the struggle when he said, now I'm winning, and he was looking for the win, as if chess was a book you could just open up and close up. But chess is very, very hard, and now he was unprepared to deal with the complication. g5 would have been the correct decision if he had had a sense of danger, but he played king f3. Now black played king c6, king e2, bishop f8. There's no way to defend that pawn. King d3, bishop takes c5, bishop c3. And here black improved his game with a6, and after a long struggle, black went on to win the game. And this position is very difficult for white to defend because he's, for all practical purposes, down a pawn because these two pawns don't do anything. The e5 pawn is weak. The central d5 pawn is very difficult to handle. Black has a big advantage. So you see what happened. In the critical moment of the game, the first moment I showed you, white could have continued the struggle, and then odds are he would have won the game. But his mindset wasn't about playing chess, struggling, competing. It was about winning. It was about ending the game right there. And so he looked for much more than there was, and he closed himself to the battle.